think you got about 10.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Some of you already have seen it, but we've got, we're clustering some people together. Erin and Lynn and Katie Edmondson and the Bean Girls, Megan Mavis and Kate and Phil and Diane, Kathy and
How many are you?
Can you hear? Yep. I should have 10 to 12 people.
There's about 12 right now.
Okay, I can take 12.
Good sized group will cut in like the other, right?
Is okay? Hi. How many do we have? We got a group coming? Got 2, 4.
We're ready to go.
You're the only guide that's going to talk,
No, each guide will be talking.
so hand it to whoever's talking.
Oh, you mean in this group?
If different people are talking.
Phil and I might.
That's all we've got. There's some people waiting.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and go. Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kate Durbin. I'm with Hometown Perry, Iowa, and welcome to our first cemetery tour. We are in partnership with Forest Park Museum here, and we will be giving you a little overview of some of the famous and infamous people that are buried here, and some different historical highlights as well. The first area we're going to look at here, and this will also be a working exercise for some of you, is the Civil War and GAR Monument. Now, how many of you know what the GAR stands for?
Great Army of the Republic.
Correct. And what side of the war was that? Correct. Now, this particular monument is dedicated by the Redfield Post, but this doesn't mean that the town of Redfield had anything to do with it. A lot of times when the veterans came back from the war, they would get together and form little groups and sit and talk about their adventures and their escapades and some of the things they had seen during the war. So what they would do is form these clubs. One was the GAR Club. It later became the American Legion, and several others were formed. The GAR is one of the longest clubs that existed. Now, they named it the Redfield Post because that had special meaning to some of them, so that was the name they decided. It has nothing to do with the town of Redfield. Now, this section here is almost all Civil War veterans. There are some spouses buried here, which is not usually the case in military cemeteries. But one of the exercises you'll have here is to find the youngest to serve in the Civil War and the oldest to serve in the Civil War. And they may have served in more than one war as well. Just because you were buried here doesn't mean that you actually were from Iowa. You may have settled in Iowa later and come back here to be buried. So there are also 6 different states represented as well. So I'll let you wander around and see which ones you can find. It goes in almost a half circle here.
Facing the monument.
How is everyone doing? Okay, here we have our youngest. There are actually 2 gentlemen here. Arthur Agee was born in August of 1846. So in the Civil War, that would have made him how old if he served in 1861? 15. Then we...
Wasn't another 1846?
Yes, there are 2 out here that are the youngest. And this gentleman was also born in August of 1846. So we have 2 that served in the Civil War, and he didn't necessarily go in 1861. He may have gone in at the age of 16 or 17 as well. Now over here we have Lewis Hardenbrook. Now Lewis was born in 1806. So if he entered the Civil War in 1861, he would have been how old? 50. 54. And Lewis had also served in the Mexican War as well.
There's another one like that over there that was marked.
Right. Some have served in more than one war.
The markers you see are government issue. If you go to a military cemetery, you'll see row after row of these like this, like in Arlington or so forth.
I'm sorry. Yes. This is Lewis's grave here. He was from Indiana. You'll find Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, and I believe Pennsylvania. Iowa sent more soldiers for the amount of population in the state at that time to the Civil War than any other state. Now we will go over this way.
But now if you do realize the Civil War was over in 1865 and Perry wasn't really settled until 1868. So that's why probably a lot of these people were not Iowans. They were people that came in and settled from the east. And notice none are Confederates. They're not going to end up in Iowa, and if they did, they probably wouldn't admit it anyway. So,
well, and if there were some Confederates buried here, chances are they were buried in the southern 2 or 3 tiers of the state of Iowa, because the closer you came towards Missouri, the more mixed the feelings were during the Civil War.
That looks like a new monument there.
Some of these were added later as family members may have changed or installed a stone. We've had some people out here restoring stones as well, but there's a long way to go in most cemeteries. There's so much damage.
Won't the government actually put up give them a new monument if it's not?
If requested, but there's probably no family members left to even do that. Next, we're coming to one of our portrayers, and we'll let him tell you his story here.
You gotta hang on to that thing? I don't do well with that. Come on in close and gather around. I'm going to tell you a story. My name is Hubble Shively. Most people around here call me Hub. I was born in 1868. I was one of the first children born in Perry. My dad, J.H. Shively, and Dave Willis farmed in what is now between what is now 2nd Street and 4th Street. And my dad also managed a mill that was on the river. It belonged to Judge Thornburg, and it was down on south of town on the river. I worked there some myself, and I did things like I had to carry the sacks of flour and had to haul them into town, but it was a good job, and when I get a few minutes time, I could go down the river and fish. And one of the really interesting things about that job was in the wintertime, the Indians that were trapping up and down the river would stop and buy cornmeal. Do any of you have any idea what tribe those Indians were from?
Fox or Sac?
Some, maybe, yep. There was a large tribe that lived in this area that was neither the Fox or Sac. What?
Sioux?
Nope. What state do we live in? It was the Iowa tribe, right? Anyway, My grandpa, Mike, told about how he and one of the Willis boys went to California during the gold rush of 1849. You all acquainted with the gold rush 1849? Good. Anyway, they rushed out there with everybody else. They hooked up with a wagon train in Nebraska, and they walked with them as they went to California. It only took them 6 months and 21 days. Grandpa kept a diary, and it was a bound leather book. He wrote with a quill pen and red ink and kept a diary of that whole trip. And if you want to see that diary, you can go to the University of California, Berkeley, and they have a copy of it in their library. Anyway, they landed in Napa and started digging for gold, and they had some luck, and they accumulated $1,000, which they brought back to buy Iowa farmland, unlike many of the guys who just drank it and gambled it away. Grandpa came back on a sailing ship, and they had to sail around the Horn. You guys know where the Horn is? That's right. Southern tip of South America. They had to go through that nasty area down there of winds and rough seas. Anyway, he came back. Now, I farmed my dad's land. And while I was farming it, I married Isadore in 1888, and our daughter Willow was born on that farm. But I got to thinking about my grandpa and decided that I needed an adventure of my own, so I went to the Cherokee Strip in Oklahoma for the land rush of 1893. Are you all acquainted with that whole episode? Okay. They lined, that day when the rush started, 50,000 people settled 6.5 million acres in one day. And it was kind of wild. They lined us all up along a road and shot a gun in the air, and everybody took off. Now, there were some of those folks who left a little early, and they were called Sooners. And I don't know if you keep up with athletics, but the Oklahoma teams are called Sooners, and that's where it comes from. What were the folks that stayed called, Phil? What? Boomers. Boomers, okay. Anyway, I was doing pretty good, and I went to check on a friend of mine in the next tent over, and I found him, and he'd been shot through the head, and I decided that I'd had enough of the Wild and Woolly West and went back to Perry. Sold my squatter's rights for $250 and headed home. When I got to Perry, I farmed a little, and then I sold the farm, and then I started a wagon and paint shop. I also worked as a bookkeeper for a lumber yard in Des Moines. I worked as a deputy sheriff, as a assessor. I was chief of police in town for 2 years, and I had a company that dealt with ice cream and fountain products, and I invented a pop, a soda. And it was a good soda, and I figured I could put it on the market, and I could take care of Coca-Cola, beat them and run them out of business. Well, I didn't. As you can see, I put that on the market at 1910 or 1913, and you still have Coke, but we don't have Perry Cola. And it was bottled in these bottles. Okay? Now, it's time for me to put a line and a hook on my pole and go fishing. So I'm going to have to bid you goodbye.
Thank you, Hub. Now we will head over to the Catholic section of the cemetery. And as we go that way, I will point out different symbols that you might have on some of the handouts you had. For example, as we go over this way, There's a grave there that says Father, and the symbol on his grave is the fireman's helmet. That belongs to George Leonard. He was one of the early firemen. When he died in 1917, they put his casket on the fire truck, and we have a picture of it being drawn out to the cemetery here. Next to it, you'll see the BPOE sign for the Benevolent Protective Order of the Elks. You'll also see under that tree a sample of small lamb. And how many of you know what that represents? Correct. You'll see several versions of that out here. Now, the Catholic section, many towns would have a separate section that was dedicated to their Catholic parishioners. It might be by the church, it might be across the road, it might be in a totally different part of town. At Violet Hill here, the Catholic section was incorporated as part of the community cemetery. So St. Patrick's Catholic Church owns this land here. The difference between it and the other parts of the cemetery is that it has been blessed by a priest in accordance with Catholic traditions. You will see a number of familiar names here: the Greenies, the Flynns, the McGoys, the O'Malleys. You will also notice some of the symbols on the sheets you had. This is not the best example of it, but we have a sample of a St. Andrew's cross. A true St. Andrew's cross looks more like an X. But a St. Andrew's cross, the reasoning for it was when St. Andrew was crucified, he asked that he not be buried on an upright, or crucified on an upright cross like Christ was. He felt that was just not very nice. So he went ahead and he asked that it be a different style. So his is tipped, you'll see it tipped to the right, tipped to the left. It doesn't really matter. But that was called the St. Andrew's cross. Now, as we approach the Catholic altar here, you will notice a Celtic cross. That's another style of cross. It was quite prevalent in a lot of your Irish cemeteries where you had a high Irish Catholic population. The Celtic cross is on this particular stone, and it has your cross and then the circle around it to represent everlasting life. Now we will head towards the altar. In about 1937, the local Catholic priest at the time thought that they needed an altar to designate their area of the cemetery. So he contacted Ira Andrews, who happened to have the equipment to do something like this. Ira arranged with some friends, and they erected this altar in 1938. The statues were added later. We haven't been able to document the exact time frame for those. The four figures represented, there again, we know, of course, Christ on the cross. We are making the assumption that the lady peering up at Christ on my left is the Virgin Mary. Another assumption is that the lady at the foot of the cross is Mary Magdalene. There is some discussion the lady on the left might be Mary of Cephalus, or Cleophas. And Mary of Cleophas may have been the mother of James the Lesser. Her role in all of this is very obscure. There are some versions that say she might have been related to the Virgin Mary in some way, a sister or a sister-in-law. You will also note at the statue at the foot there, the skull. The skull in Latin is Calvarinian. That means skull in Latin, and the skull represents Calvary, Mount of Calvary, which was unfortunately a public execution site. So a lot of times they would, after the prisoners were executed, they would just leave their bones to lay there. And so it also had the name, the Skull Mount as well. We'll take a peek behind here and you'll see an example of what we call a poor man's mausoleum. This is the this is the site of Anna Antonia Bell. This is where she decided to be laid to rest. Usually people chose mausoleums for several reasons. One, they may not have wanted to be buried in the ground. Two, the ground was too rocky or hard to dig a grave, or it was too cold to dig a grave. Or three, like in the case of New Orleans, where the minute you started digging a hole, it would fill with water because the water table is too high. So there are several different theories for this. Now, right across the way, though, you have an example of what we call a rich man's mausoleum, the Bonner Mausoleum. It was erected in 1893 of pink Cosetta stone, which was very hard to come by in those days, and it was at a cost of $1,200. So in 1893, that was a lot of money. But what does that tell you about the Bonner family?
If they had a lot of money.
And that they were fairly prominent people. Their family story is that they didn't want to be put into the ground either. So they erected this monument and mausoleum here. It is the only mausoleum of that kind out here in Violet Hill Cemetery. Now I'll take you over by there and we'll show you two different examples of family plots that we have here. There are numerous examples to be sure, but these are two that are fairly characteristic. Now as we walk through here, you will notice that some of the graves here we have, because it's a Catholic section still, you'll notice that some of them talk about coming over from Ireland or Scotland or where they were born as you go along. How many of you are familiar with the history of Violet Hill Cemetery?
A little bit. A little bit.
It was a community cemetery, and people in town thought that was just awful to just call it the community cemetery. So what they did was they had a contest and people submitted names. And there were names like Pleasant Mound and Silent Mound and Green Hills and things like that. But the one they chose was Silent Mound. Well, people didn't like it, so they petitioned, the women's group petitioned to have it changed to a name that the children in the area were all familiar with. They always called it Violet Hill, because the original part of the cemetery up there on the hill, every spring was covered with violets. And so they petitioned, and the city council said, that's fine. We'll name it Violet Hill from that point on. Here you can see a better example of the Bonner Mausoleum. Now, some mausoleums can be very elaborate. They can have stained glass windows in them, they can have skylights and everything, but this is a very simple mausoleum, actually. Almost looks like a log cabin pattern in a way. This is the Croft family plot. A family plot is 5 spaces. Presently at Violet Hill Cemetery, it's $425 per plot here. So a family plot would cost you about $2,125. Now, a lot of times families would get this thinking that their children might be buried with them or something along those lines. The Croft family, they did it a little more elaborately. They had a nice wall around it, a little entryway with the 1893 on it. Did their initials throughout each marker. Then they did a center marker for their family. And you can see that one child apparently was a Civil War veteran and came back here to be buried then. Now we'll go to the next family plot. And for those of you who are in Perry, as we're walking along, in this part of the cemetery, you'll see some familiar names. They're old settlers that have, some of their family is buried here. There's the Breeds. He was a businessman. You'll have the Mowers. The Shoeharts will pop up on occasion. You'll also see different shapes of tombstones. You will see there's an urn on top of that particular one, the urn. You'll have the cylinders over there. This one is called an emerging stone, and it refers to the fact that it looks like the carving is emerging from the rock. particular family plot is the Ames Platt family plot. So called because apparently one of the family members was married and they merged the two families into one plot. So on one end you have the A for Ames, and on the other end you have the P for the Platt family. And then you have the relationship stones like father, mother, wife, husband scattered throughout. Now this particular monument, back in Connecticut, there was a monument company that made markers out of what they called white bronze, which was a more elaborate name for zinc. They would do the structure of the monument and then ship it to the region to be finished off. In our case, Des Moines had a monument company that finished these particular monuments. And so this one was probably done in Des Moines. It is zinc. It lasts for a very long time, as you can tell, and the detailing on it stays very crisp. It is also hollow.
Does it open?
Some do. I've never bothered with it, but some were designed to tip back and be opened, so they could store mementos of their loved ones in it. In this case, we have on the symbol on this end is the sheaf of wheat, and then on the other side is the anchor. Now, from your symbols worksheet, what do those mean to you?
Shock or sheath of wheat represents old age or a fruitful life.
And the anchor?
Safely in God's harbor.
There is also another definition for anchor, and that comes along with the soul being anchored to the earth. If the chain to the anchor is broken, it means that the anchor, your earthly form, is no longer anchored to the earth and has ascended to heaven.
I want to say it was zinc, but it was white. Why?
They call it white bronze because it sounds more marketable and sounds more elaborate and more expensive.
These are too.
Yep. The markers are also. Right. Well, it was probably if you did a whole package of some kind, you probably got some sort of a price break or something. Now, as we go along here, you'll also notice other symbols. Here we have a closed book. The closed book may refer to the Bible being closed to show that the life has ended. It and an open book can refer to your deeds or accomplishments in life, and if the book is closed, it means your accomplishments have come to an end. Or if they're still open, it might mean that another family member is still alive, or that your accomplishments live on after you. Now this particular, here we have a rather nondescript little stone here. This is the resting place of William R. Shong. William R. Shong was a Chinese businessman here in Perry. He was an immigrant who came to New York a number of years ago and was not able to make a go of it there, so he moved farther inland, hearing of the riches in the Midwest and things. So he settled in Perry. Now, William R. Shong was a very trusting man. He thought that when people would sign a note or script for you, why that meant that since they signed it with their name, why their word was bond, and it was as good as payment or a check, basically. And that's what got William into trouble, because people would take advantage of him and they would not pay their bills there. And then other people would sometimes come and they would sell him stolen merchandise. And being a kind and trusting soul, he would pay them. And then one person came into his shop one day and saw things that had been stolen from their home. So they had to call the sheriff, and he knew that this was not the case, that William was indeed above doing what he thought was right. And so he explained everything to William, and they tried to get everything settled down or straightened out here. So William passed away from a mysterious fever, probably typhoid at the time, although there were several going around. And normally he would not be buried in this part of the cemetery. But he, who was born a Buddhist, had converted to Christianity. So they did allow him to be buried in the Christian, so-called Christian section here, instead of in an area that would be separate from others. So that is why William is here with everyone else.
When was he in Perry? Do you know?
He was probably in Perry, I believe it was the 1920s. It was the late teens, 1920s. And I think he died in 1924, but I would have to check that for you.
Sean? Is that what you call it?
Arshong.
Arshong.
William Arshong. They gave him an Americanized name at some point. So they could, so many people got Americanized names. And Arshong may have been his full name, but we don't know that for sure. So we're going to go over and meet Caroline Bruce now. You can see how families personalized their markers to go along with things that they felt were important, or to make it look like they were prominent members and things. You can see the different styles of stones, the different shapes, where they just wanted to bring their own personal touch, kind of like when you decorate a home. You want to add your own personal touch to things.
Good evening and welcome. I am Carolyn Bruce. My husband Ralph was a railroad man. He was an engineer in Edinburgh, Scotland. And keeping in that profession, he moved our son Jack and me to Canada. Our son Carrie and our daughter Carrie and our son Charlie were both born in Canada. Our youngest son, Harry, was born here in Perry in 1885. And we lived here while my husband split his time between our home here in Perry and St. Paul, Minnesota. He was a railroad engineer on the Milwaukee line out of Perry, and then was hired on to the Sioux line out of St. Paul, Minnesota. On May 1st, 1902, our family received a telegram telling us that my husband Ralph had died in a train wreck. There weren't many particulars in the telegram, so my sons Jack and Charlie left to go and bring the remains of their father back to Perry for burial. There was, however, an article in the Perry Daily Chief about the accident. Engineer Ralph Bruce was killed at 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon in a wreck on the main line of the Sioux Road, 4 miles from Camden Place. Fireman Knoll and head brakeman Loomis, who were in the engine cab, saw the danger and jumped. Both were bruised but escaped serious injury. The locomotive jumped the track and, turning completely around, toppled over on its right side. Engineer Bruce was found dead beneath the boiler. The half-dozen freight cars were badly damaged. The train, a way freight consisting of 65 cars, was drawn by one of the larger engines and traveling at a rate of 25 miles an hour. The engine left the track at a switch near the Twin Lake Ice House. It is supposed that the front trucks of the engine failed to take the switch as the wheels passed the switch point. My husband was 50 years old and left me with 1 daughter and 3 sons to struggle on after he was gone. Because he was a railroad man, we decided to put an epitaph on his stone, which you can see over here, that reads, "No more I feel each urging breath. My steam is now condensed in death. Life's railway o'er each station passed. In death I stopped to rest at last." Thank you very much for stopping by tonight.
We did a tour with the 8th grade students this afternoon, and it was amazing how They weren't aware that Perry was a railroad town or was founded as a result of the railroad, but one young boy has a grandfather who lost 2 fingers as a result of a railroad coupling accident. So they were able to identify with how dangerous the profession was and how many people were actually maimed and injured and killed in this quest for bringing the railroad and bringing transportation and goods to people. We will be walking through this way. We will be looking at we'll be looking for other symbols and things. We'll walk a little slowly because there's a group ahead of us. But you'll notice a lot of the organizational and military symbols along the way here. Here's another GAR. We are not sure why some stones face the opposite way. Traditionally, most people are buried with their head to the east, and so that way there's 2 reasons. One is to greet the rising sun. The other one would be to greet the second coming of Christ, so they would be facing it. Now, part of it depended on the terrain of your cemetery. You get up into the older part of the cemetery, and the terrain doesn't make it very easy for you to be buried facing directly east. Another point would be the time of year you were buried, because the sun would not be coming up at the same place each time. One of the theories for why this stone is placed the way it is to fit in a narrow plot. Another one would be if this road hadn't been over there, so it would be visible from this street as well. And we've never found it in writing anywhere, but those are just little ideas we put out just to make you think about it a little bit. Now, in Victorian times, it was not unusual. Cemeteries were very elaborately decorated. You could plant, a lot of times my grandmother's grave has peonies on either side of hers. Or you could plant different flowers, you would have trees. Sometimes the poplar trees like you see over there would be planted around a grave. Unlike today where they put restrictions on the things you can bring into a cemetery. But they were very beautifully landscaped, and the grounds were very spacious usually. And in Victorian times, it was nothing for families to come out and have a picnic in the cemetery, which sounds a little odd today, but for a nice park area, people took advantage of it. Sometimes they would have water features like a pond or a lake of some kind, or a stream through it as well.
Is this a Christian symbol here?
Actually, no. I think it's just a decoration. People get pretty creative.
Yeah, all right.
You'll see some, like, they'll put their initials on them. This one's rather interesting. We have Amanda F. Swartz, who was the wife of Dave Replogle down there. So we're not quite sure what how that worked, but either she kept her name or something, but okay. And watch your step through here. The terrain is a little uneven. Here you'll see more cylinders. You will notice the ivy used a lot in cemeteries. Ivy tended to represent everlasting hope, and so people would work that in there. Now, Violet Hill doesn't have as many elaborate epitaphs as some cemeteries do. You will notice in the older part of the cemetery that you find more references to epitaphs and things. And that you also see a different kind of military stone here, the low flat stone. Does anyone have any questions so far? If you see a symbol that you aren't sure of, why, feel free to ask.
What was the earliest, do you know the earliest burial?
No, we had, some of the students asked that this morning, and we are not sure. It would probably be in that area. We thought that the cemetery was probably officially opened as a community cemetery in the mid-1890s. Well, you saw that the Croft family monument was 1893, and the monument, or the mausoleum, was 1893. So, I'm sorry, 1880s would probably have been one.
Really? So where was there must be older cemeteries.
Yes, there are.
South of town, I know.
Yes, there's the Mauer Cemetery, the south of town, just across from Hy-Vee and back in there, and that's an old settler cemetery. You go farther to the southwest and you'll come to Valley View, where a lot of the councils and other settlers were buried as well. It's still an active cemetery. The Mauer Cemetery, I don't believe, no, it is still active as well. There's also an old cemetery just north of the Perry Golf and Country Club, back in there a ways. It was towards the site of Buffalo Grove, which was an old stagecoach stop, and that is where some of the early settlers before Perry was even a town were. People were there in the 1840s and 50s. We found land records to that respect. And so some of them are buried back in there.
That's not the same as the Fairview Cemetery.
No, it's not. The Fairview Cemetery is also very old, and the Fairview Cemetery is an example of a church cemetery associated with a particular church for their members to be buried in. You have frontier cemeteries. If you were following the news the other night, they have either found in southern Dallas County what may have been a frontier cemetery or a family cemetery. It's just south of where the little cemetery in the middle of the road, as they call it, is. And they found remnants of it, so they're not sure if it's a family plot that was just there for that immediate family, or if it was indeed something a little larger, a small community that's no longer there. So they have to do a little more research about that one.
Perry was really not incorporated until when, though?
Officially 1869. It was laid out, Harvey Willis and his brother laid it out over the fall and winter of 1868.
Something a lot of people may not know, and it really isn't, well, it's old, I guess, but my dad told me, and then I work for the city, and I confirmed it at City Hall. Way off in that corner, there's a mass grave of several Hispanic migrant workers who were on a train that crashed, and I think he said it was in the 30s.
See, we've had several versions of that. We've had versions that it was Chinese railroad workers, which doesn't make a lot of sense because most of the Chinese stayed in the western, along the west coast. They didn't go much beyond the Colorado area. And then, but the migrant workers would be a possibility.
We've no identification, no way to family. So.
Right. There's also, if you're interested, Potter's Field, where people who were indigent, had no family, no funds or anything, are buried way over by the fence on the north side of the cemetery as well.
Do they have any markers?
Most of them don't, no. If they knew a name, they may have put in a little bronze marker or wooden marker of some kind. There's also a new Potter's Field over in that corner of this cemetery as well.
Potter's refers to indigents, is that?
Yes, Now, if you're familiar with the fraternal organization, the Woodmen of the World, there's an example. They have various symbols there. You'll also see as an example of a drape, which shows mourning on that particular stone. We have another fireman symbol. And here's another variation of a child's grave here. Here is the twins Nora and Dora that passed away in this particular stone. And now I would like to introduce you to Professor William Tarr. There you go, Roger.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to welcome you here to Violet Hill Cemetery, and allow me to introduce myself. I am Professor William Tarr. With a title like that, you can perhaps guess what my line of work is. That's right, I'm an educator. And in fact, education has been a priority in my life from the time that I was just a little shaver going to the country school till the days when I attended colleges like Drake College in Des Moines and Simpson College in Indianola and even Iowa State University. Here in Perry, I'm the principal and a teacher at Perry Business College, also known later on as the Perry Normal School. This establishment occupied a big wooden building down on Willis Avenue, about where the Rocking Horse Saloon is right now. And we occupied there the second floor of that building. The school was established in 1892, and it was a private school, and so students had to pay a tuition to come there, and we enrolled both men and women. My responsibilities there involved teaching such courses as accounting and record keeping and shorthand. Now, sometimes people say shorthand, and the students that I visited with this afternoon had no clue about shorthand. Have any of you folks taken shorthand? Okay, so that's a course now that kind of has died out, but it's one that prospective secretaries at least took, and where just briefly different symbols were used to represent words, and a person who was a secretary could jot down notes very quickly from a letter that the boss was dictating, and then take it to their desk and translate it back into the exact words that the person spoke, and perhaps type the letter then, or whatever the disposition would be. In 1895, became a part owner along with two other gentlemen there, and then in the year 1900, the school was incorporated and became known as Perry Normal School. Now, people today don't really know what normal schools really are. You know, normal kind of means like everybody else, but that isn't quite the context that normal schools had. Does anybody have any knowledge about normal schools?
Usually high school students.
I'm sorry?
Usually high school students.
Usually high school students? Perhaps older high school students. These were people who were prospective educators, and normal college or normal school was where it was a teacher training institution is what it was. And so the school expanded and pretty much occupied the whole building there after it became the normal school. I continued my tenure there until the year 1906, at which time I left and went to the big city and began teaching at Highland Park College in Des Moines. All along I've been interested not only in the education of the students there at the college, but also in the community. And one thing that I'm very proud of is the part that I played in bringing the William Jennings Bryan to town. What do you know about William Jennings Bryan? You know anything about William Jennings Bryan?
Ran for president many times and never made it.
Okay, you're exactly right. I think the records show that he ran for president 3 times, and perhaps why we don't know any more about him is that, like was mentioned, he never got elected. But he was a great orator. And he started out being a lawyer, and I guess really a crackerjack lawyer. He could argue cases like nobody else. And then because of his speaking ability, the politicians kind of got a hold of him, and it said that a perfectly good lawyer was spoiled by the politicians then. But he went around the country giving speeches, and sometimes I think associated with his campaign and sometimes not. But I was instrumental in bringing him to town to give a speech. And when he came to town, we showed him all of the grand accomplishments of Perry. We showed him our new concrete sidewalks and the tall 3-story buildings on 2nd Street. And then we took him down to the St. James Hotel, which was south of Willis on 2nd Street on the east side. The building is not there anymore, but he gave his speech there at the St. James Hotel, followed by a reception at the Elks Lodge. And at that reception, all of the politicians in the area and anybody that was somebody attended that, and it was an event that was talked about for months after that day. And this was in the year.
Did he not?
I'm sorry?
He made the Chautauqua run.
That could well be. This was in 1902 that he came to Perry. I'm not sure I mentioned that. He did come another time to Perry, I believe. It was after 1904, we know, because that's when the Carnegie Library was built, and there are photos of him speaking on the front steps of the Carnegie Library. Another thing that I am very proud of, my accomplishments here in town, are my involvement in the temperance movement. The temperance movement was one whereby different individuals and organizations sought to eliminate the sale of alcohol and perhaps tobacco in town, eliminate gambling and all the other bad things that sometimes go on. I was an officer in an organization called the Federation of Iowa Law and Order. I know that there were some other temperance organizations as well, kind of like the WCTU, I believe, and some others. And so I worked hard in this organization with some other people, and we never achieved the prohibition of alcohol here in town, but we did accomplish getting the stores to close on Sundays, which we were trying to do. And so this was a high priority for me in all of my life. And so those are just a few things associated with William Tarr's life, and I rest right here. I was never married. It's thought that this was perhaps a baby brother of mine that might have passed away here. The symbol on that marker isn't real well known, and so if anyone recognizes it, well, there are people that would like to know. But if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them. It's felt that perhaps...
When did the school close, do you know?
I don't know. I think that there's a good chance that it might have combined with another school under the direction of this the man by the name of C. Durant Jones, who we've heard of just recently because his plaque was put on the wall of witnesses in Sumas Court, and he was instrumental in the Chautauqua movement. He was a kind of a prohibitionist like myself, and Jones College existed for some time in a building that's now just southwest of Fairway a little bit, a big stone building there. And so it's kind of felt that perhaps the two colleges combined and it became Jones College then. He was a contemporary of mine.
That is interesting. Wasn't Iowa State Teachers College, or some of them like that, called normal schools also?
That's very possible, yes.
Cedar Falls was called the Iowa Normal College or Iowa State Teachers.
And there were normal training courses in some high schools, I believe, at one time as well.
Right.
And
That's interesting. I never knew what normal was.
yeah.
Standard. Thank you, Professor Tarr.
Thank you all for coming.
Now, if any of you are familiar with the Masons, you will see a Masonic symbol on the Gwynn marker over here. And we'll hurry up to meet Cornelius McKean. Now, as we come up here towards Cornelius, you will see an example of an arch, which usually meant separated in death but united, or separated then united in death. You'll also see another sample of a lamb. And you'll see a drape over here, the obelisk shape. You are now in the original part of the cemetery. So a lot of these are early settlers.
Good evening. My name is Cornelius McKean, and I was one of the earlier settlers here in this township. Back then, we called it Buena Vista Township when I came here, back in 1853. But today, we got it changed to Spring Valley, and today we know it as Spring Valley Township. Well, my family came to the United States from Scotland, the Scottish Islands, back in 1718. We were very proud of our family. The family was descended from Scottish kings and lords. And we loved adventure, all of us. My father was no exception. My father, when he was a young man of 23 in 1820, decided to join the United States Army. Now in those days, the United States Army went out into the wilderness, to places where there were no settlements, no civilization of any kind, nothing but Indians and wilderness, and built forts and posts and explored. And my father's company helped build Fort Atkinson, which we now know as Fort Omaha. And he was in the Army for 5 years. He enjoyed his time very much, and he discovered he liked Iowa very much. He returned home back to Kentucky and married my mother. My mother was Mary Ann McLaughlin. The McLaughlin are a very, very old family. They go way back in Kentucky history. And her father, I'm named after, Cornelius McLaughlin. Now Cornelius was in the War of Independence, and he suffered greatly. He was taken prisoner and had a very tough time. But he survived, and his daughter, my mother, was immensely proud of him, talked about him often, and told us many family stories. Well, unfortunately for my father and my brother and the rest of us, my mother passed away when I was 14. At that time, we lived in Missouri. My father was heartbroken, and he decided we needed a change of scenery. So he remembered Iowa, and we moved up here to Dallas County, Iowa in 1848. Now the year we chose was called the year of the deep snow. And it got that reputation because it was very deep snow that winter. Deepest I can remember. 3 feet deep in the flat ground, and 6 or 7 or more in places like that down at the bottom of the hills. So we all suffered greatly that winter with ox teams and some horses, and on foot. We managed to get around some that winter, but it was very difficult. None of the fancy trains or horse and buggies like we've got today. At the end of that year, though, we were all a lot stronger, us and all of our neighbors, and my father and I started building a nice farm. At the end of 4 years, we had quite a little place, and I felt like I had enough money to court Miss Nancy Ann McCulley. Now, Nancy Ann was from another early family around here, and she was very proud of her family. Her family was an old Kentucky family as well, and her great-grandmother, she was immensely proud of this, had helped save a settlement back then, a whole garrison. Some Indians came, and she escaped them, ran off to the fort with nothing but a pewter dish. Now you may ask, how can a pewter dish help things? Well, at that fort, the Indians besieged the fort, and after a while the soldiers and the settlers were out of ammunition. Their situation, according to my wife's family lore, was desperate until they remembered that that pewter plate was there. They melted it down, and we had enough ammunition to fight the Indians for a while longer until the Indians finally gave up and left. So that pewter dish helped save the day. My wife told many other stories about her illustrious family. But when we first married in 1853, we decided to seek our own claim. We moved just a little ways west of Perry up here and set up a claim in Spring Valley Township. Now in those days it was Buena Vista Township. Some of the neighbors weren't too happy about that name. They liked Spring Valley much better because there were all the beautiful springs coming into the Coon River over here. So So they also wanted some new township officers and elect some township government. So they came to me and said, Cornelius, we need to go talk to somebody wiser who knows how to do this. Why don't we go see John Roberts? So we went to old John Roberts, a little ways south of here. And John didn't know we were coming. In fact, his wife said he's off in the wood chopping up some rails. So it took us a while to find him back in the woods by the Coon River. We finally found him, and John agreed that we had a good case here, and he wanted to change the name too, and he wanted to elect some township officers. So he said we should draft a petition. And since I was able to read and write, I was the one who was elected secretary, and I got to write the petition. We took it down to old Judge Burns. Now, Judge Burns was the first county judge. He was down in Adel. You might have heard some stories about the judge. A very honorable man, very good man, and a very, very colorful man. I can tell you stories for hours about him. Well, he liked our petition, said, you have a good case here, I'll approve it. You go up and put it to election of the people about changing the name and electing some officers. So we did. I was elected the first township clerk, and that was the first of my offices. At that point I was only in my early 20s, but over the years I served as Justice of the Peace, and I also served as a captain of the militia, and I was also a school director, among other things. So I've tried to serve my people well around here, and I've worked hard. Nancy Ann and I had a very good life, and unfortunately she passed away in 1903. I miss her very much. We did have 2 times of sorrow though. We lost our boy Evan when he was 15 years old, and we lost our boy Jasper when he was 31. But we consider ourselves very fortunate because up here on top of the hill is Mrs. Lammy. She lost all 5 of her daughters before she passed away herself. Only one lived to be a wife, and some of the others died as teenage girls or young ladies. So we considered ourselves very, very fortunate. Well, today my health is still good, but I'm a bit deaf, so you have to excuse me for yelling. I can't hear too well at all anymore, but I can still get around, and I still do my chores, still try and keep the place up. And I do want to thank you for coming and seeing me today. We don't get too many visitors here, so thank you again. Please enjoy the rest of your visit.
Thank you. One question. With the lady that lost the 5 children, was that have been in the 1980s?
No, this was in the 1880s and 1890s.
We do have a family in another part of the cemetery that lost 3 of their children within a week of each other because of the flu epidemic at that time, 1918. And one of the people here in town remembers playing with them, the children. They were there one day and then going to their funerals several days later, to just show you how devastating it was. Now, poor Cornelius here, unfortunately, the deafness that he suffered as a result of a measles relapse was his undoing, because he didn't hear a train as he was returning home from a church program one night, and it hit him. He survived the crash, but it injured his hips and legs, and he was more or less bedridden for the rest of his days. And he survived for a couple of more years after that.
The lady, 1855, but there was no death.
They just never put it in, probably.
Yeah, some will not have death dates on their stones because either their family, well, we'll be getting to Martha's, and that will be. Now, the street between here used to be a dirt road, and they would bring rock in to make it more passable. But one of the things they would do, you've heard of quilting bees and sewing bees and things like that. One of the things they would do here would be to have a graveling bee. And once a year, the neighborhood or community, people who lived along here and people who were part of the community would get together. The gentlemen would bring in rocks and gravel, and they'd bring in road drags and their horses, and they'd clean up the road. The women would fix these huge meals, and they would have a graveling bee and resurface the road.
So is the Catholic portion all filled up now or what?
No, there are. How many spaces do you think are out here?
15,000.
There are 15,600 plus spaces that are sold out here. There are more than that, and some of the spaces aren't filled because some family members chose not to come back and be buried in a family plot, or for some reason or another did not return here to be buried at all.
Careful of this lady on the bicycle.
So are there Catholics buried other than in the Catholic?
Yes, you can be. If you are Catholic, you can choose to be buried with other friends or family members in another area. Some choose, you petition the Catholic Church to be, if you wish to be buried in the Catholic section. And
I remember some Canasbys here.
oh, they are scattered all over.
Yes.
Which ones?
I don't know.
Now this is another military area, contrasted with the one up there that was for Civil War veterans. This is a veterans area, and the people buried here are veterans of Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, and I believe there's one over there that I saw this afternoon from Korea. Now, I don't think there's any Vietnam-era soldiers in here. These are all male. If there was a spouse, they might be buried someplace else in this cemetery. Again, you see the government issue markers, and of course the bronze markers indicate which war that they were in. This area is owned by the American Legion, and you have to apply and for permission to be buried in this area. This afternoon we talked a little bit about Memorial Day at this point, and I asked the students, now next Monday what will be different here than now, and most of them knew that there would be flags on the markers and a lot more flowers. So we still see that as a tradition. If you want to come around this way, you can.
These flags up all the time here?
Yes.
So you're saying there's a lot more in the world?
They have little flags that they put here. Can you see here? Yeah, if you're welcome, come this way. We're headed over that way next, so you can again see some of the markers. Tells what state they were from. Many times which war that they were in and what their rank was. And yes, there is one woman buried here, but she was a veteran.
Let's see, 1929 to 1970. World War II most likely, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess so. You notice now that they are in sequence. I think they've started and come around. Here's the most recent one right here. So there are more plots left, and some may choose to do that rather than be buried somewhere else within this cemetery. And the flags are supplied, I think, by the VFW or the American Legion, but the cemetery crew takes care of the flags, so I understand it. Okay, our next presenter is over this direction.
So many different immigrant groups here. It sounds almost just Italian,
Yes, it
and
does.
one of our more prominent businessmen, Emil Natali, who passed away, that was, I believe his name was also Italian, if I'm not mistaken. So
A lot of.
pardon?
Go ahead.
So you will see quite a representation of names out here. You will find the Greeks with George Sumas, one of our beloved mayors and one of our most decorated veterans here. You will also have you'll have your Germans, your Irish, or in some cases Prussian, because of that. The Welsh. And of course, your Scandinavian countries are represented. You'll have the green, there's all sorts of names around, and the Irish, the Scots.
Not so many Italians.
Not very many, but they pop up periodically.
A lot of them.
Got a lot of people in here.
A lot of them.
And the mines did too.
Yeah, came and worked in the railroad.
You must come very, very close.
Nancy has suffered a bout of laryngitis, so she will have an assistant tonight.
Yeah. Oh, how about I use this? All right. Is it going?
It is on. It's a.
Okay.
But you'll have to move a little closer so you can hear her.
My name is Nancy Lovelace, and I'm the wife of the Reverend Lucius A. Lovelace. I met him when I was at Lenox College with just 1 year to go, but he swept me off my feet, and we got married in 1866. My family came here from Hebron, New York in 1853 when I was 7 years old. My father was a builder and a contractor. He thought he could better support his family if he came out here in the rapidly growing state of Iowa. So my mother and he packed up us 10 kids. I was the youngest, 7 years old. And in 1853, we made a fantastic journey. We went from Hebron down to Schenectady by train. And I don't know if you know, Schenectady's way over on the east, way over by the Hudson River. And we went west across the entire state of New York by canal. We went by canal boat on what we called Clinton's Ditch, but it was officially the Erie Canal. And then we were 1 week on Lake Boat. We went by 3 lakes, 3 of the Great Lakes, on our way to Chicago. First we went down Lake Erie, and then we went up Lake Huron, and then we came down Lake Michigan to Chicago. And then we headed northwest toward Dubuque by railway, but the rail line stopped in Rockford, Illinois, so we had to go from there to Dubuque by wagon. My family's had a proud military history. My oldest brother served in the Mexican War. I was born in 1846, the year after the war broke out. And then I had 4 brothers that served in the Civil War, and that started when I was just as I was turning 15. And my husband was a veteran of that terrible war also. I heard a lot of war stories from my grandfather on my mother's side. He was first cousin to Ethan Allen, the Revolutionary War hero. I don't know if you remember him. He and his Green Mountain Boys, they won the Battle of Fort Ticonderoga, and they captured some of the cannon from the British. And later on, General George Washington used those cannon against the British. Now, my grandfather on my father's side was David Fuller, and he came to this country when he was 13 as a bond servant or bond slave, and he was called that because they had to work without pay. He and other teenage boys were kidnapped off the streets of London, England, and brought over here and sold for so much a head, depending on how big they were and how strong they looked and how old they were, because you see, the deal is that when you're 21 years old, if you're a bond servant, your master has to let you go. Well, I didn't know if you knew that Negroes from Africa weren't the only people that were sold here. My grandfather didn't wait till 21, though. He ran off. My husband and I have had a really full and wonderful life. He's been a pioneer minister throughout western Iowa, and I've been his partner in ministry. We've been blessed with 10 daughters and 1 son, and of those children, 6 daughters are still living. and we've been blessed with 38 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. Do you have any questions?
Where in western Iowa, do you know?
Well, just several towns out there. He'd kind of like the Apostle Paul. He'd start up some churches and start up another, you know.
What church do you know?
I don't. I'm getting old. I can't remember as well as I used to.
Was he known as a circuit rider?
Probably so, but I just don't remember. Yeah, I know. Yeah, Methodists. Yeah.
Tended to be circuit riders.
Yeah.
So how did you come to Perry?
Well, it was just kind of on the edge of some of his churches. It was a nice little town, and we just decided to settle here.
How many years did you live here before?
Oh, well, at least
you raised most of your family?
Yes, we raised our children here, but I really can't remember how long it was. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm not sure a lady from my era will know what to do with this, but pretend it isn't there. Do I have to do anything to it to make it go?
No, it's already turned on. So.
All right. Okay. Well, welcome. My name is Edith. My maiden name was Edith Hutchison, and I became Edith Schuhart when I married my dear husband, Paul. I was born in 1886, at the height of the Victorian era, and I grew up in the little town of Barnum, Iowa. Have any of you ever heard of Barnum, Iowa? Good, good. Well, I'm doing better tonight. With the children this afternoon, no one had heard of Barnum, Iowa. Barnum is a very small town. It's in Webster County. It's west of Fort Dodge. And it was a railroad town. The railroad went right through town. And that's where I grew up. In the Victorian era, employment opportunities for young women, respectable young women, were very hard to come by. But I always knew that I wanted to do something special with my life. My faith was very important to me. And when I finished school, I felt that I was called to go into the missionary field. The Methodist Church had created something called the Deaconess Movement to help young women move into missionary work. A deaconess was a woman who would be trained as a nurse or an educator, a social worker. She might be an administrator. There were many different jobs that you could choose from. And they received our training at a special school. In 1885, a lady named Lucy Ryder Meyer had established the Chicago Training School for missionary work for young ladies. And it had become so successful because, as I said, the opportunities were so limited that it had grown and grown to the point that by the time I was ready to attend, it had become large enough to move into a new location right in the heart of downtown Chicago. Now, for a small town Iowa girl, the thought of leaving her home, her friends, and her family, and going to live in the big city all by yourself, where you don't know anyone, was a big decision to make. But I was determined to do it, and so I took the train from Barnum to Chicago to begin my new life. Of course, the railroad systems at the turn of the century were the way to get around because very few people had cars, the roads were not well constructed yet, and it was very efficient and economical for me to take the train. And I wasn't really alone because there were many other girls just like myself who were coming from all over the Midwest to attend the Chicago Training School. And when we arrived, the senior class took us under their wings. They gave a big banquet for us to welcome us. And then during those first weeks, they would go around to the classes with us and explain how things worked and answer our questions. They made us poor homesick girls feel much better about being away from home for the first time. Our training was very rigorous. We had instruction in nutrition and in health care, in child care. We had to learn nursing, and we studied religion. These were very rigorous subjects. And in addition to classwork, we did a service project where we would work down in the inner city providing meals to the poor and the destitute and the hungry of the inner city in Chicago.
Also, we taught English, because this is also the peak of the immigration era to this country. And thousands of people were pouring into the United States every year, many of them from Eastern Europe. Most of them did not speak the language, and it was one of our projects to teach English to anyone who needed to learn. In addition to school work, we had weekly prayer meetings as part of our religious training. And these were times of encouragement and spiritual refreshment for us, because all of us felt the same calling and deepness of our faith that helped us keep going. Besides classwork and service work, we all had to do housework. Just like young people today are assigned chores at home, all of us had chores at the school to take care of each week. Now, I felt very fortunate because I was assigned to work in the dining room. And the dining room had just been remodeled. Everything was modern and state-of-the-art, for the turn of the century, that is. So that was where I did my housework. The school officials were very careful to keep us accountable for the time we spent, to help us organize ourselves. Once a week, we had to fill out a form in which we had to total all the hours we had spent on our various activities for that week. We had to total how many hours we spent in class, how many hours we had studied, and how many hours we had spent doing the housework. And these had to be turned in by 10 o'clock sharp on Saturday night. In this way, the school held us accountable, and we held ourselves accountable. It was really a wonderful training method in organization and kept us focused on what we needed to do. But of course, it wasn't all hard work. We had fun as well. We did a lot of the same things that young people do today. We had Christmas parties and Halloween treats. We had something that you don't hear of anymore. We had potato bakes. We would roast potatoes and take a little salt and butter and have a whole party around eating roasted potatoes. They were quite a treat. We might put on little plays for each other. That was very popular. So we do have a lot of happy memories of those days as well. Now, our biggest challenge was to pass a final exam so that we could get our deaconess license. And this filled me with butterflies. I was so worried I would not pass. It was a hard test, just like final exams for any young person today. But I studied hard, and in 1911, I graduated from the Chicago Training School with my deaconess license. My parents were very, very proud of me. My first job after I finished school was at a place called the Deaconess Baby Fold in Normal, Illinois. Baby Fold is a biblical reference to Jesus as the Good Shepherd. And the idea was that the flock of lambs were kept in a safe place called a fold. So the Deaconess Baby Fold was a safe haven for infants and young children who had nowhere else to go. We would take care of them until new homes could be found for them. Have you ever heard of the orphan train? You've heard of the orphan train? From about 1850 until the early 1900s, there were thousands of children in overcrowded orphanages of the industrial cities in the Northeast. When immigrants came to this country, quite often they clustered in the industrial cities, hoping to find work. So there were many children in overcrowded conditions there. And a movement was created to bring them out of the city and here to the Midwest, to Iowa and other states in the Midwest, and to find new homes for them with farm families. Of course, orphan train was the system used to transport them. Orphan is not quite an accurate term because many of these children were not orphans. Some were, but many were not. Many had one or both parents still living, brothers and sisters. But the sad fact was that their parents either could not or would not be able to take care of them. Many of them were from immigrant families. And it had to have been a very hard decision for those families to separate from each other. But just like the ones that we took care of in Normal, Illinois, you had families that felt the best chance for those children to have a good life was to let them go and live with another family that was already settled out here in the Midwest, where it's open country and better conditions for them to hopefully have a good life. I was very proud to have a small part in taking care of some of these children as they made their way to a new life in America. Well, I hope you're enjoying your journey through time and memory. Yes, yes.
You were saying here, Chicago Training School is very much alive today. Chicago Training School is united with our seminary that I left in '47 on the north shore of Chicago in Evanston. And they call it Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary, and the Chicago Training School girls were to the in the south wing.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for letting me share a little of my life with you.
Thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you. Very.
Having a retired Methodist minister that you helps a lot.
That's wonderful.
Well, I couldn't keep shut on that. Have you more familiarity with Chicago Training School?
No, I have not. I looked it up on the internet before we did this.
Yes,
and,
I see.
To get a little more information about it, but it's wonderful to know that it's still going
it's very
today.
much alive today.
Because I couldn't find current information on the internet.
Oh, you surely should be able
I
to.
should be. Maybe I was looking under the wrong title.
I will. Your name is?
Even more. In the older part of the cemetery, you will see where they have more religious references or epitaphs or things. But in this part of the cemetery, you'll see more personalized details. It could be wedding rings, it could be a hobby or a love of something here. And as we walk along, you'll see some of these. You'll have to kind of watch for some of them.
Yeah, they are. Many times as I've been out here, they're there.
This way?
Oh, I was going to cut over this way, through this one here.
Ma'am?
Yes, I'm sorry.
When you see, quite often you see maybe a flat service.
Yeah.
Why is it set in the middle? Do you have any idea what to? No.
I really don't. I'm sure there are military specifications for it, but if they've because here they've put it right in the ground, but as you said, on some of them you'll see them posted on the back of the stone.
Maybe there's not even a body or any remains.
Quite possible. As we walk through here, you'll also see one for an Iowa State patrolman over here too.
The American Legion for several years. You got those markers, and you still do when you serve in the armed forces. And they used to put them beside your stone or at the foot of your grave. And then they started putting them on the back of the stone. Yeah. Because sometimes the nurse didn't want all the stuff.
Learning something.
I think that, and that could be just as an art itself, or the family could have requested
So they could do
on the back.
So there's flexibility in how that's done.
Right.
Now here we have our Perry Fireman's Memorial. No one is specific is buried there, but the Perry Fire Department felt it would be nice to honor those who have helped serve the community in the area. So they brought that out here and erected it. As I said, you'll start to see more personalization as we go along here. You'll see landscapes such as trees. You'll see wedding rings with anniversary dates. And part of that is the technology.
Here's a picture.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we have somebody in Ames. We lived there. We built our house, and my son died early, and they put a picture on.
And actually, a lot of European cemeteries, you will see the pictures of the family on them.
How long they last.
Yes.
Don't fade out.
Down in the Amana, well, not the Amana colonies, but over in Victor, Iowa, where they have a German settlement, why you will see a number of them with pictures probably from the 1800s along there. This particular one is another example.
So where are the potters over in this section here? You're talking
Back over in here, back in that corner.
where that group of markers over there, maybe? Is that?
That's also, that was also the black section. Oh, the cemetery. Yes, the Negro section.
So she,
Yes.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes, we have small.
it's like a locket.
Yes.
Because right along that tree line there is what is called the baby range, and where a lot of infants were buried. And then the new Potter's Field, as they referred to it, is back in this corner. Some people did have markers, but for the most part, that open area there, you'll just see a little bronze marker from the funeral home.
I see. And this is the African American up here?
Over here will be. It was never written, or it was just always, and probably a lot of these stones were not here until later years, but they were just kind of in a separate section. That was just the way things were.
That's how it was.
Uh-huh.
Life is, right? Yep.
And Elvina's daughter was in my class.
Yes, about
Which one, Gina?
No, it was
Now you might find this marker over here interesting. It was one of our tour guides or assistants this afternoon. This is her stone, so she wanted to show it off a little. But because of the laser technology now, you can do family pictures. Their family picture is on the back side. And the things they love, her cat, his car. And you can see the family picture.
That was my man.
Remember any of your mirrors?
My dad was Ralph.
And we were talking about military plaques over there. You'll see that gentleman's with the Iowa State Patrol.
What did you graduate?
no.
You probably were closer then to my uncle.
What do they say about saving the best till last?
Too good. What a beautiful time of night, though. Oh. Well, hi there. Come on in closer. I'm going to tell you about Martha Templeton. Martha Templeton was also known as Grammel Templeton to the people of Perry. But what you may not know is that she was born into slavery in 1841 in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Generations of her family had been born into slavery, so when she was born, she was the property of the owner, Joe Riley Pruitt. Now, her mother and her father did not live on the same plantation. Her father had a different owner. Occasionally, he was allowed to come and visit her, but not very often. Her mother passed away when she was 2 months old. Fortunately, her grandmother was a cook there on the mansion for the Pruitt family, and she raised Martha and her older sister. Anything that Martha knew about her mother, she learned from her grandmother. Now, Martha was careful to be obedient, to avoid any whippings, and fortunately, she had a kind master. At the age of 8, Martha was taken to the fields to hoe the corn and the cotton. By age 10, she could do most of the field work. This was one of the hardest jobs on the plantation. You would work from sunrise till sunset. You were allowed short breaks and a small amount of food, enough to keep their strength up so that they could work. They worked 6 days a week with Sundays off. And if they were lucky, their masters would let them go to church with them, although they sat in a different section and the men were separated from the women. Now, Martha would tell a story about a young lady working in the field. She didn't realize at the time that she was working that there was an auction going on and her daughter was being sold. This lady looked up and saw a chain of slaves going by her, and in there was her daughter. There wasn't anything she could do at this point. Had she left, she would have been beaten or whipped herself. All she could do was wait until they were done for the day. And she went over where the slaves had passed by. She knelt down and noticed that this was her daughter's footprints in the sand. Upon touching them, she got up and went back to her cabin, where there she had to grieve the loss of her child. You can only imagine how great this would be, not knowing where she was being sent or who she was being sent to, a kind master or a mean master or to another auction. Now, at this time in the South, there was a lot of anxiety taking place. Abraham Lincoln was running for president, and if he got it, there would be a war. The South figured that they could emerge victorious over this. So when war broke out, they put the slaves to work building forts and camps for them. They wouldn't give the slaves any guns for fear that they might use it on them. Now, when the war ended, the slaves were declared free. Martha stayed with Mr. Pruitt and rented some land from him. Then she saved some money up and they moved to Tennessee. In Tennessee, she met Mr. Templeton, whom she married and had 12 children with. They later moved to Enterprise, Iowa, where he worked in the coal mines there. Now, in 1915, they decided to move to Perry. They had a daughter and some family here. Martha moved to Perry and quickly became part of the community and part of the church. Martha could be found many a times working in the church. Her faith was very strong. Another thing that Martha was famous for, people would remember her walking from her house to Beaver Creek with a fishing pole over her shoulder. 2 miles there, 2 miles back. As she came back, there was that fishing pole, maybe a couple of fish on it for her dinner. Now, Martha lived by herself till she was 106 years old. And because of her failing health, she moved in with her daughter, Maisie Lewis Allen. She lived there until January 18th, 1949, and she passed away 13 days before her 108th birthday. When Martha was asked what she attributed to her long life, she said it was her strong religious belief, which she also instilled in her children. Martha saw a lot of changes take place in her lifetime, some incredible ones. She also saw some exciting changes in our American history. Thank you for coming, and do you have any questions?
This is amazing.
No. Most of the people buried in this section are African American. We had a fairly sizable African American population here in Perry. Most of them were here either as laborers with the mine or with the railroad. As a matter of fact, those of you who are familiar with Perry, where the Perry Elementary School is the site of one of the 2 roundhouses that was here. And so a lot of the African Americans lived in the little neighborhood just to the north of there. For example, Winter Street, Summer Street, and Vine Street were 3 areas that had a lot of African Americans as well. And so we still had a sizable population to the point where we had 3 different African American churches here for a number of years.
I should point out to you, too, that Horace Lewis's grave is back here, and this was Martha's grandson. And Dora Lewis still lives close by over here at the elementary school.
And Dora has been a great source of information to us with her stories of growing up here and family members and everything. Well, that concludes our cemetery walk this evening. We've been blessed with wonderful weather. We will head back to our cars and we will answer any questions, or you can look at other stones as we go along. It was Horace's, this was Horace.
You mentioned Enterprise.
Yeah, and Horace is buried back there. Okay. And what's that to Dora? Dora was Horace's wife. Okay.
See, Horace is on the Wall of Witnesses.
Yes, he's down in Sumas Court on the Wall of Witnesses.
And he was at the New Bethel Baptist Church that he was pastor at, and 40-some years.
Oh, yes, for over 40 years.
And he was a chaplain at the hospital, plus...
Plus, he also helped out when he would help fill out down in Des Moines and some of the congregations there, or any of the other areas as well. So Horace, and for years was, and Dora is still alive and sharp as a tack. I mean, she has wonderful stories. Those of you who follow jazz, well, you have Leroy White, who is on the Wall of Witnesses.
Right.
Leroy was also known as Roy or Snake White, and if you know anything about Midwestern jazz, you will see his name pop up as one of the ensemble musicians, particularly out of the Kansas City area. He would be sitting in. Then he went to make his fortune out in some of the New York jazz clubs. He ended up working as a composer for different functions in, I believe it was the Disney Studios.
Desilu.
Desilu Studios, correct. Sorry. Knew it was a D. But he had Desilu Studios there. He and his wife had one son who was killed during the Watts riots. He came back from Vietnam and was killed during the riots in the Watts. We don't know the circumstances around it. They never talked about it after that.
He's mentioned there's a book called Outside In about the African American
yes.
and he's mentioned in there.
Right. He and Eddie Bearfield, also from over by Woodward, the mining town of Scandia. You would find them all in the jazz club scene.
Irene Miles, is she buried in Des Moines, do you know?
No, she's buried here. I believe so. Say anything. Yeah, Irene Miles, she grew up here. Her early years were here, and I believe she was buried here. We have a copy of her obituary. I'll have to track down where exactly she was buried, but for years she played the piano at the Hotel Savory in Des Moines.
We saw her there.
And she was also on the small jazz club circuit that still existed in Des Moines started in the 40s. She came back here in the 40s, I believe, and then they continued in the 50s and 60s and 70s because we moved to the Blue Note, I think, was still downtown in Des Moines in the 1980s when we came.
I'll be there. There's your Uncle Russ.
Oh dear. Yes. This is overwhelming today.
Oh, is that your relative?
That's her uncle.
Your uncle?
Right.
Oh, served in World War II and Korea. My goodness.
Right.
Changing the layout of it and adding to it. So they just tore it down, and we think it went towards scrap metal, probably in the scrap heap somewhere.
Right.
Sometimes they thought to look too old-fashioned in the 70s. They tore all that stuff down.
Right, because at first we wondered if it was melted down to use for the war effort or anything like that, but
Probably in the 60s
couldn't
or
find
70s.
anything that implied that.
You feel the calling to deliver a sermon out here? Huh?
Well, I looked at you. You didn't need it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't know that I needed one either. But
I didn't get cranked up.
We drove past it. We waved. Surely. Oh, well, then you didn't do much. Heaven knows we're going 30 miles an hour. It's 10 miles.
I think you got about 10.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Some of you already have seen it, but we've got, we're clustering some